Hey there, Boddlers. It's Jason from Even Footing Games. They asked me to do a spooky ad about Anchor FM, and the spookiest thing I can think of is not knowing what Anchor FM is! If you haven't heard of Anchor by Spotify by now, it is the easiest way to make a podcast, and it's got everything you need all in one place. Anchor's got tools that allow you to record and edit your podcasts right from your phone or computer. And when you host on Anchor, you can distribute your podcast on listening platforms like Spotify or Apple Podcasts or any of your favorite podcasting apps. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place, and best of all, it is free. So go to anchor.fm or download the Anchor app today to get started. Boo! Hey out there, Poddlers. I am Jason, the creative director here at Even Footing Games, and you are the lucky folks who have decided to join us for another episode of Even Footing Games Presents. My guest tonight is Rat Grimes, the creator of the weirdly surreal fever dream of a podcast that is the Dead Letter Office of Somewhere, Ohio. Rat is a former video essayist, a published poet, and a public servant. They write loud music, weird fiction, and are, like most of us, in debt and likely to die somewhere in the Midwest. In Rat's case, Ohio. Coming from Pennsylvania, I feel that last one on a spiritual level.
Yeah.
Rat, thank you so much for joining me tonight.
Oh, yeah, no problem. Glad to be here.
And we are glad to have you. So the folks that I've been talking to in this little mini-series that we've been doing are creators of weird fiction, weird podcast, and the Dead Letter Office is weird at its heart, with a capital W, in the best way. I found the podcast during the pandemic. I went through an existential period of dread, like everybody.
Sure.
And I also happened to be furloughed, so I had a lot of time to really experiment and listen to a lot of things that I may not have come across. And the Dead Letter Office is one of them. I don't even know how to start explaining what. Just give us a quick rundown of what Dead Letter is, and then we'll go into it deeper from there, because it's like 9 different podcasts all woven together in such a delightful way. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So it's a horror fiction podcast. There's also bits of comedy, a little bit of sci-fi, and all sorts of stuff in there. But essentially, it starts as an anthology series where there's like a frame story of a guy reading letters that are stuck in the Dead Letter Office of Somewhere, Ohio. And it develops a sort of meta story like a lot of these anthologies do, when you kind of realize, well, there could be more tying into this and not just the little stories within. So then it branches out and becomes a story about unionizing and gender. So there's a lot going on there.
And that's that really what it is. I think when I first found it, I think the series was still ongoing at some point. So our main character, when we start for the first 10 episodes or so, is a fella named Conway, right, who starts out in the Dead Letter Office. And just for those folks who don't know, what is the Dead Letter Office at the post office? Do you want to go into that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of mail, either because the recipient isn't marked correctly, or, who knows, maybe there's a tear. Some mail can't be delivered for various reasons. And so it gets sent to an office where in usual real life, they sort through it and, keep a lot of it around. But, who knows what happens to the rest of it. But basically undeliverable mail goes to a special place, so it's not sitting around in the post office.
And it's the idea of Dead Letter Office is just one of those weirdly ephemeral bits of reality that most people just don't know about. We don't even think about it. I think the first time that I came across the premise was a Clive Barker book, I think. Maybe the Great and Secret Show. I think one of the characters was in it, worked in the Dead Letter Office, and kind of found his way into the weirdness of the world through much the same, just reading the letters and realizing there was more going on underneath the surface. So we start out with Conway for the first half of the series reading these letters, and he starts to have probably the most existential crisis that you could have. And I don't want to spoil anything, but he very much
comes to realizations about the world around him. And then midway through, we're introduced to Ren, who sort of takes over the plot for the rest of the series. Conway is very kind of almost noir detective. He's very dry, very droll, very Midwestern. He's got a twang. He feels much like a kind of a truck driver. He's got that sort of blue collar feel to him. Where Ren is queer and transgender and very sure of themselves and yet not sure of themselves, sure who they are, but not necessarily where they are in the greater scheme work. So how did you go from a protagonist who starts off so sure of his place in the world and then pick up midway through with one who's kind of figuring things out as they go, literally?
Right. Interesting question, because originally the thought was kind of, there are so many stories like this that have a frame like the Twilight Zone, for example. It's got this Rod Serling figure who's very straightforward and tells you the moral at the end. And so I thought, well, that's kind of an interesting character, especially if you put them in a real kind of typically boring job, like a desk job. So of course, Conway's going to be kind of unflappable because he's a government worker. He's seen it all. Right. He's kind of there, but he has his own space a bit. And well, he does at first before everything goes weird. But so I figured if Conway isn't going to be there, we need a character who can drive action a lot more than he does. For him, a lot of it is the stories that move things forward. And so I figured if we're going to have a main narrative, we need someone who's going to actually go do things. And so not only do we have just like a character who will, drive action, but it was around the end of like 6, 7, 8 episode when I kind of really got what I was going to do, because from the start, I was like, oh, this could be a fun little anthology thing. And then as I went, I kind of realized like, I think there's more going on with Conway that he hasn't really figured it out for himself yet. And so we have a queer protagonist who can kind of push on that and kind of lead to where these realizations could come from. So
the plan then was not to kind of go from this anthology to this more meta-driven narrative, or did you sort of figure that out as you went along?
Yeah, I wish I could say I was like some genius strategist who like started out with this, but no, I was just like, yeah, I could do that. Let's start it. And then as I was going, my writing process is a lot like that in general. Like what I'm currently writing on now, I had an episode idea, started writing it, and halfway through I realized, no, the ending is going to be totally different. Like the way it's going right now is going to just swerve. And that's kind of what happened. And I think one of the big instigators of this was after episode 4 came out, which it's kind of like the first bigger story. It's got like several letters, several characters. Someone asked if we'd be hearing that voice on the radio again. And I was like, yes. Yes, we will.
My plan all along, yes.
Yeah, it was like, that's a good idea. And so it kind of taking ideas from people who've listened and from, myself and other media and being like, yeah, I think that would work.
So we talked just really briefly before we started recording about a mutual love for tabletop gaming.
Oh, yeah.
Both kind of fall into that forever DM status. When you're plotting a campaign, what's the difference or the similarities between writing your other writing, your podcasts or your weird fiction and prepping for your players for the table?
Sure. There's a lot more overlap than I would have expected. Part of the reason I started this as an audio thing, I've had audio recording equipment for a decade or so from college when I used student loans to buy a cheap microphone for music. Yeah. And so then I had done that, and I had done a lot of playing of Dungeons and Dragons, a couple other role-playing games, and I thought, like, I can do goofy voices. I can do some like character work, very light, because I have no acting experience outside of a couple of like in college we shot like 5-minute short horror films and whatever. But
they count.
So, so like very little official acting experience and even unofficial. So, but I kind of thought of it like, what if these are like characters I'm playing in a game, like an NPC? And
I was wondering. Yeah.
so when I'm planning a D&D game now, I take a lot more thought into setting up the scenarios and making sure there are hooks that, I mean, I always will have a hook or something, but something that specific characters will really want to bite into. And that kind of also goes back into writing, where I have like planning campaigns has like steps and like possible plots, but you're never really fully sure where these things are going to go, because the players could be like, actually we're going to go sabotage the king, and you're like, okay.
You are okay.
Yeah. So being able to like think on your feet and letting characters kind of figure things out is basically what happened by the end. Is I was just like, okay, just imagine I'm Ren, what am I doing? And it's like, well, probably some weird stuff. So yeah, there's a lot of tie-in and a lot of back and forth between the two, but the writing for the show has a lot more. It's a lot harder. There's, because I have to be both player and DM essentially, right?
Yeah, yeah. You do all the voice. Well, I mean, you do most of the voices yourself, the main voices, right?
Yeah, all of I do Conway, Ren, all of the letters, and then there are a couple characters like the director who shows up really briefly. Liz, who was a shadow person kind of thing that had a mini story, and another person there were also guest voiced, and then at the end, the very last character, Lucy, is as well. But yeah, all the rest are me doing my best.
Well, I mean, I kudos to you, because I didn't realize until I started looking into it that Conway and Ren, that you're doing both Conway and Ren.
Oh, yeah.
It's just there's such a dissimilarity, not just in their physical voice, but also how you write them. Their written voice, which is impressive that you were able to write two such distinctive voices.
Sure.
And the times when the few times when they interact with each other, those must have been a little schizophrenic for you, I would imagine.
It's strange. I'm like, I record all of them for one character and then all of them for the other. So like, I'm just reading out like line and then a reaction to a line that isn't there, but is also me. And I'm thinking like, well, how am I going to voice that reaction line that I haven't done yet? So
you're not listening to yourself. Reading one and as you say the other. Okay, all right.
Not usually.
Yeah, it fits pretty seamlessly. So I mean, I guess it helps that you've got them in your head. But yeah, how did we get to this point, Rat? You mentioned music in college, and you write loud music. So what was your journey from kind of where you were to creating this stream of consciousness fever dream of a podcast?
Sure, I used to be in several metal bands, progressive metal.
Nice.
So we were like, playing 16-minute long songs with like all this stuff. And so I had experience doing that and being on stage a bit, and like not really, I was never really like terrified of it. It was a little anxiety inducing at first, but once you're out there, it's like incredible. So then I started doing some more like acoustic stuff. And when I was in college and didn't have a place in a basement where I could blast music. And then I had always been writing a bit in my spare time, whether, whatever it is at the time, whether I'm running a game or just writing my own stuff on the side. But, it's so hard to get things actually like published, especially if it's not a novel. Like if you just have like 100-page novella or something, it's easier now. But, in like 2015, 2014, it was a lot harder even. So a lot of that I kept to myself or just like showed some friends. And then what actually started this specific podcast was I don't really listen to all that many fiction podcasts, or at least I didn't at the time. And someone had been talking up the Magnus Archives, and I was like, I don't know what that is, but it's horror. So, I mean, like, I'll probably like it.
It's been brought up a few times. That seems to be a big influence on a lot of folks. Yeah.
I got to tell you, I've only listened to one episode. It's really great. I listened to the first episode and I was like, this is so cool. I want to do this. This is what I want to do. So I'm not going to listen to all of their stuff and like, unconsciously start stealing what they've done. I probably already have, just because it's such a big encompassing show, but
it kind of spread its tendrils out. Yeah.
But it was just so cool. I was like, I have these horror stories. I could do that. So the first few episodes are basically converted old short stories I had with a frame narrative put in. And then after those ran out is when I had to start writing more more fully new original stuff. And that's when the pace of the podcast got a little slower.
Well, the pace didn't get slower. I think it just morphed into something different. Like it still moves along. I think there's a sense of urgency to the last half of the show, you know, not just in the, I'm telling you folks right now, there's going to be spoilers. I've been trying not to spoil, but I want to spoil things.
Yeah. Spoilers from here.
Yeah. Spoilers from here out. If you haven't listened to Dead Letters, 20-ish episodes, they're all about half an hour, 45 minutes. Just go listen to it's good, come back, and then we'll go from there. With Conway realizing that he's not real in the sense of the universe,
right?
It gives him a chance, or he takes the opportunity to remake himself in the form of the people he thought were oppressing him all along, the boss.
Right. Exactly.
Right? Yeah. So that idea resonated with me in the sense that if you come to question your reality, your place in the world, there are two paths you can go. Do you try to craft something new for yourself, or do you grasp onto what is the most solid thing that you know? And in Conway's case, this was the bosses. So what was that decision? I mean, I guess what was the impetus behind that direction? How did you come to this to the thinking that, okay, he's not real. He realizes that now. What does he do now? Yeah.
Sure. I mean, it comes from bad jobs, basically, where it's like you feel powerless, you're poor, your time is sucked out, and, you don't feel real sometimes. Like, come home at midnight after a long shift, and it's like, am I a person anymore, or am I just like a literal stand-in? And one way to get around that, it's a bad way, I don't recommend it, is to try to get more power in that situation by, through managerial means and not through worker power. Like, take the manager job, move on up, and then do the same to the people below you so that you have more time or whatever, so you don't have to do the work. So, he felt like his life was obviously like nothing. And so, like you said, he could either take an unsure but radically different direction, or he could do what everyone expects of him, especially as like this kind of twangy, like more masculine figure, and that's to take over ownership and kind of play out what's expected of him. That's what he decided at first, because there was no one else there really to stop him.
It's really, I mean, that's like the episode 10 when Ren is introduced is really when things just take, like, it goes off into a different direction altogether. And it's you take a new protagonist and you take a new turn and it makes sense. And man, I was so angry, honestly, at Conway for becoming the boss. But I was re-listening to some of the past episodes today just to kind of refresh it in my memory. And yeah, just talking to you, right? He is passive for those first 4 or 5 episodes, because he's just reading the letters. He's not acting on them. It's just like, this is weird, and I guess I'll go have a beer now.
Yep.
And even when things start to happen strange to Conway, like he finds his dead friend's body holding a phone, and he's like, all right, well, this is what we do now. There's no sense of I want to take agency until he's given the decision to come and to become the boss. Now, Ren, on the other hand, like I said, is so sure of themselves, but not necessarily their place in the world, takes all of this weirdness as commonplace. There's no, I don't know what to do. It's like, this is just how things are. And there's a line that they say towards the end of the season, it might be the last episode, too queer to be weird, too weird to be queer, or something like that.
Yeah.
That felt like it resonated to some extent. Tell me about that line. Like, what did that line mean to you when you wrote it, when you said it?
Yeah. So in a lot of ways, Conway, this obviously isn't how it started, but by the end, I came to kind of think of Conway as expectations on people born, like me, like assigned male at birth. There's really no better way to say it at this point. But, you know, like if you look like a guy, you are expected to be doing these things and acting these ways. And, you know, that's not necessarily a new point. But then, so that is kind of, you know, I guess you could think of it as like Conway turning boss is like this super ego kind of figure. And like then with Ren, I put in like a different side of myself that I've experienced, one that's a lot more true to me personally. And like, you know, growing up as a weird little kid who like painted their nails and like got made fun of for it. And like, you know, but also was into like Edgar Allan Poe and all these weird things. So like, you know, I didn't really fit in, especially like later in like high school when I had really long hair and was playing super heavy metal. Like a lot of the other like queer kids at high school and stuff were not like that. And I didn't think I was either. I was like, nah, I'm cis, sure. So like, you know, there's this feeling of a lot of weird fiction horror groups. A lot of them can kind of be, even if they're not trying to, can be a little uncomfortable for certain people. Even if it's a queer group, there can just be different groups and you don't always fit in. And especially like for me, I don't really fit into most of them, partly because that's just like who I am. But then, you know, you also get into queer groups and it's like, you can find the right ones, but there can also be a lot of like, just like with any other, when you get people together, just like any other group, there's going to be a lot of different interests and personalities. And it's like, if I want to talk about like weird horror fiction in groups, you know, you kind of have to really seek out that kind of group and just generally not feeling like you really fit into any kind of established community and trying to just either make it on your own or make your own, which is kind of what Ren starts to do at the very end, tries to start reaching out and like, saying like, hey, I would like to meet others like me. Finally, I think we can do it. Can we do this?
Yeah, he and Lucy, who, big massive spoiler, turns out to be, I guess, Conway's original self. I mean, it gets a little hazy, but yeah. At least for me, like I'm like, I think this is what I'm figuring out. But they reach out to her towards the end, and there is a, before, you know, the horribly ambiguous ending occurs, but there is something that feels okay. There's a connection that's happening there. Do you think that you could have written Ren, who's so self-assured, when you were younger, before you kind of became a little more self-actualized?
It's certainly not like that. It would have been a lot more assured in self-hatred, maybe, or assured in like cynicism at others, but certainly not in what you know, what you're good at, and what you belong in, which I think is what Ren's big thing is. They know where they belong, at least in terms of the weirdness. Like this weird stuff, that is what Ren does. So like it may not be, no one else may get it, but Ren does. So they kind of focus in on that.
I think that's interesting because it's too, you know, it is, there's a subplot that kind of comes in towards the last third of the season or so, where the shadow people who are, I mean, you could very much see them as, you know, the worker drones. I think you call them drones, you know, or cogs at some, you know, some. It's a very anti-late stage capitalist podcast, which I really enjoy. But they rise up, you know, they have a revolution, a fiery revolution, and burn down the office basically. They burn down the Conway's post office, and I think that the self-assuredness that Ren knows, like, this is my place, this is what I'm good at, is such a juxtaposition to Conway's not feeling that way. In your career, if we're looking at it from a capitalist satire, which to some extent it is, there is a nobility, even if society sees you as weird, there is something good about knowing what you are good at and being proud of what you are good at, as opposed to Conway, who might be good at reading letters, but he takes no pride in it. He takes no joy in it, you know, or at least it doesn't seem to be. I've been re-listening with a new kind of set of ears, and I think it is a show that deserves a second listen because, again, you can get through it in a weekend, you know.
Yeah. And
because the second season, Ren is very stream of consciousness. I don't know how much that was. And the things that they see and the things that they experience are so flickers and flashes of memories, and it's, I missed, you miss so much. They remain a focal point to themselves amidst all the madness. Is that where you feel you are right now? Do you feel like you've been centered in yourself enough to sort of combat capitalism and society and madness and all the existentialism, that you may come across?
Short answer, no, but okay. I'm doing my best like everyone, right? It certainly helps. Like I didn't have a ton of time off work, but I did have time at home to really like think and not have to perform for anyone. Like, if I'm at home, I don't have to perform my like job face, my at the store face, all of these personas we have to put on, and you can just like kind of figure out what you want to be without any of that pressure. And that is sort of when I came to realize that like, hey, I'm probably non-binary. Like this has probably been a long time coming. And so that's kind of the focal point of this big turn, is that you have Ren pulling Conway towards this realization that he does not want to see that like this person he lost is him or her in this case. Someone on, I think it was Twitter or Tumblr, had made a little comment about my show that I think was really insightful, but it was like, why is no one listening to this podcast about the Postal Service unionizing and a non-binary weirdo like helping a trans woman realize what she always was, or something like that, where it's like, yeah, when you have that self-assuredness and you know who you are, you at least have something to hold on to when everything else is like possibly gone in a second.
That's great. I mean, it really is. It's an impactful message. It really is. And I think that's what I've spoken with a few podcasters who are in the queer community who are transgender, and the podcast sphere for them has really been a way for them to sort of explore who they are on a more deeper level, because there's that level of separation. Like, I'm creating a story. This is fiction, but any story that you write will have an element of yourself in it. There's just no way around it. And I think weird fiction more often than not is probably even more autobiographical than just straight fiction. So So what has your experience been now that the podcast is out, now that people kind of realize, you had the listener on Tumblr who summed it up so nicely.
Yeah.
What has the feedback been like? You put this very queer positive, this very transgender positive thing out into the world. What have you heard back from folks?
It's been, getting positive comments is always great. And like, there was like, much like yourself, there were a lot of people like, what the hell, Conway, what are you doing? Like when that
I really was like, come on, man, get together.
And that was like the best feeling in the world. It was like, yep, you got it. You all understand what's going on. You know why. Yep, it's a perfectly correct emotion to have. And then once it starts getting into this more explicitly queer content, it hasn't been brought up a lot explicitly in feedback and stuff that I've gotten anyway. But I look at all the people listening and it's like, well, it's because a lot of them are queer. So there's like, they don't really bring it up as much because they're just like, oh, yep, I relate. Cool podcast.
It's their lived experience. Sure. Yeah.
But yeah, it's gotten like, I think I just recently checked, it's like 115,000 downloads total. And it's like, I thought I'd get like 500, like,
for doing it all yourself. I mean, that's impressive. You had some sound equipment. I'm going to be honest, all over the place. That's just our role. You had some sound experience making music. How did that translate to doing the podcast? Was it a different experience to put together an audio drama than it was to make some 20-minute heavy metal?
Oh yeah, way different. The biggest difference is like, well, in both you kind of have like a dramatic rise and fall. You need parts, you need like things leading into other things, you need builds, you need themes, all of these things. So like, I kind of understood that, but just how much revision is done compared to like music. I would often be like, I would hit on something and I'd be like, that's it. This is the riff. This is it. We're doing it. And in this, I'm like, I think I spend way more time revising than I do writing, just going back over and over and over and polishing. And that the editing of it was a lot of where I had experience from that was trying to do video essays on YouTube and stuff. And video editing was just so draining that I quit very, very early. But I was able to carry over not only like editing music where like fades and cuts and EQ and all of that, but then like, you know, layering dialogue with music, like having important cuts and transitions, you know, so kind of those two spheres together helped me do it. And yeah, I just kind of like years ago taught myself how to use Reaper. That's the digital audio workshop I use because they had a free trial that I used for 10 years and then finally bought a copy. So
cool. You talked about sort of crafting how the rise and flow and the ebb of excitement and understanding how like a 20-minute prog heavy metal song, things rise and fall and rise and fall. So did it, especially those last few episodes, did it feel like music when you were writing it? Because it really is. There's a lyrical quality to how Ren speaks in the first place, but when I say fever dream, I mean fever dream. It really is. It's very stream of consciousness. So were you thinking in musical terms? Because when I write, and I'm a musician as well, I will. My dialogue kind of goes like I'm singing it. You know, it's very there's a musicality. It's the same thing. It's there's a there's a rhythm. So. Was there that feeling when you're really getting into the flow of things that you're making music in a sense?
Yeah. The best part of it, I think, is like I score it all myself too. So like,
so you're playing all the instrumentals and the interstitials and stuff?
Yeah.
Cool.
So like when I'm writing, I can almost sometimes hear the music I'm going to put to it. And then like, or I'm like, I write something and I'm like, ooh, I think I know like a good like paragraph that could go with this music that I wrote for it. And so like, yeah, when I'm writing some of these things, I'm either like listening to what I've written or I kind of have it in my head and fit them together. So like, you know, I can have like, oh, I want this like really nasty bend on the guitar to like match up with this word, you know, the sentence or whatever. So there, especially with Ren, there's a lot of that. They have like when I was in college, my major focus, I was an English major, but I really focused on early modern American lit and the Dada movement.
Sure,
like,
absolutely. Yes.
That is
yes.
a lot of like influenced everything from then on that I do basically. You know, it's one of those things when you find it, it's like completely revelatory, even if everyone else has already seen it and they're like, yeah, we know. But it's like when you find it, you're like, whoa. So yeah, having a lot of this like surrealist kind of stream of consciousness stuff not only does have like that feel, but also it definitely is musical in a way to me with especially with my soundtracks coming with it. It was interesting. Like the episode 4 is where I first like started putting big musical pieces into it and covering things I maybe don't have as much of a right to as I should, like in terms of distribution. Like I've got cover license, like I think it's like a mechanical license, but I don't think that fully covers a podcast. But
right.
It's also weird that like if they want to come at me, I'll take it down.
I was gonna say a cease and desist letter is a pride, you know. You frame that anyway, yeah.
Yeah, it means someone saw it.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, that episode 4 is when I was really putting the music and the words together and they kind of flow back and forth. So for sure,
cool. Yeah, the second you said Dadaism, it was like, yes, that's exactly like there's that surrealism in the very capital S sense of the word. You know, there's Eugene Ionesco is in there and Rene Magritte. Like you can hear that weirdness. Like that's so good.
Yeah.
Yes.
And a lot of them were like violently anti-capitalist. A lot of them were socialist.
Yeah.
And so it's like you can kind of see the illogic of capital breaking apart.
And now we get to see it in real time, right?
Yeah.
Did you ever read Grant Morrison's run on Doom Patrol?
It has been like on my list for a long time.
Get to it, but I don't even know if I would consider them bad guys, but they fight like a Dada surrealist brotherhood. You know, they're Dada superheroes basically, and and it's that stream of consciousness writing that really it says so much and doesn't say a damn thing on the surface.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Tell me about the influence David Bowie had on the show.
Sure. There was something about when I was coming to the end, I wasn't thinking about it terribly much throughout as I'm writing, as, these subconscious things just kind of come through. But by the end, when I was writing this, I kind of had this, like, the feeling that the characters have at the end, this pit in your stomach that's like, this is not correct. Something is wrong and I can't figure it out. And I think there are some songs that feel kind of like that. And Life on Mars for me is one, even though it's very kind of upbeat sounding, there's just like this something to it that makes me almost, I don't know. It's strange. I have a lot of strange feeling towards certain things. And it's like, it makes me feel like lost in a way.
Yeah.
And I love the song. But there are a couple of other references in the end, I think, too, but I can't remember the other song at the moment. But
Oh, You Pretty Things.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. The strangers came today. It looks as though they're here to stay. Yep.
They're just such evocative lines. And he's always been, like Black Star especially was something that really hit me.
Holy moly. Yeah.
And yeah. So like, thinking about this ending, I was definitely thinking a lot about Black Star. It just like coming to the end and realizing you're at the end. I'm still here, but the characters are not. And, so like these characters are kind of inhabiting this feeling. And and then reflecting back, I decided to directly include those things because at the very end, it's I don't know how much up to interpretation it is, but, kind of in my mind, these characters have had the rug pulled out from under them, just like kind of like Conway did.
Right.
And they realize that all the things that have been happening are audio. It's just sound. They don't exist beyond it.
Right.
And that's that feeling of, it's like watching your life on a theater screen. It's just so surreal and disorienting. And, just those songs especially gave me a really strong feeling of like dissociation that would kind of fit perfectly with that ending. So yeah, at first didn't really think much about Bowie in terms of it. And then by the end, I was just kind of reflecting back on the whole thing and how much music went into it. And yeah.
So what do you think Ren would do then? Now that they know that they're not real either, what would their next step be?
That's an interesting question that may be addressed in the future.
we're working on something. Okay. Is there a follow-up season or another show coming your way? What are you working on right now?
I am currently working on something else.
Okay.
Kind of new show. It is not a direct like sequel to anything, but I'm writing some episodes for something that will be revealed soon.
Very cool. Very cool. So are you doing the solo again, or have you roped some more people in to help you out, or is this
I'm doing all the writing and music and probably the editing, but there will be a cast this time because I would like to not voice act so much.
Sure. Well, Rat, last question. What are we excited about right now? What are we reading? What are we watching? What are we getting into that's really firing those cylinders?
I just bought Authority, the sequel to Annihilation.
Okay. Vandermeer. Yeah.
I've not read Authority, but I loved Annihilation. And I the first few pages of Authority, I was like, I got to stop reading till I'm done writing, or else once again, I'm going to just take this stuff. Yeah. So there's that. I recently just finished Young Justice, the newest season, because I watched it when it came out and was waiting for 10 years for
I know, right.
But yeah, there's a lot of just recently, because it was taken off of HBO Max, re-downloaded OKKO, Let's Be Heroes, and Infinity Train. And those are both great. And recently watched Memoria. That was an interesting movie. If you want a fever dream, stream of consciousness, Memoria was very good.
Memoria, okay. I'll check that one out.
It was supposedly only in theaters. It was doing like a tour thing where they said it would never be streaming, and it was on Mubi for a while, and like you can find it if you don't mind some shadier resources.
Right.
It can be found.
If you don't mind peeling an onion,
it can be found. So
gotcha.
That's
Memorial to check that out. Yeah.
Tilda Swinton just kind of like dream walking through 2 hours of movie. So
I love Tilda Swinton.
Yeah.
Anything she's in. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So strange.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Rat, do you got anything you want to plug? We've got a new project that's coming out soon. Do we have a release date, or is it still kind of up in the air? Okay.
Yeah, I'm kind of, I've got like 4 episodes written, and I'm trying to get a whole season written this time before I start production, because then I'm not like rushing myself every week. Yeah, but it will be coming out. There will be some more information soon. It will be sci-fi horror heavy, a lot more leaning on sci-fi this time. There will be a cast. It's once again in Ohio, because that's where it happens. So,
it feels like the middle of the. I had family who lived in Ashtabula, and even as a kid, every time we went, it was just like, there's something that ends here.
Yes, yeah, it's true.
It feels like a slow ending in Ohio. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So where can people find you then? Where can they get more information about what's coming up?
Sure. They can go to somewhereohio.com and listen to the show there. You can follow Somewhere Ohio on Twitter at Somewhere Ohio. There's an Instagram I just made that hasn't posted much, but there will be more in the future. And there's a Patreon, also Somewhere Ohio, that will be up and running again here soon. And that will help pay for guest actors and artwork and stuff. So
awesome.
Yeah. All of that, go listen. And there's a bunch of other great shows, especially like the people that guested on my show. Go listen to their shows too. There's too many to count, but there's the audio drama community is incredibly supportive. It's unreal. So
absolutely. We will have links to all of Rat's social media stuff available for you folks at home. You can just click the link and there you go. Rat, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me. I honestly enjoyed the hell out of the Dead Letter Office. Like, it's such a trippy, fun, weird show. And anytime a group of shadow people takes down the man, I'm all right with it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for listening.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you out there, folks, Podlers. This has been Jason, Even Footing Games Presents. All of our social media stuff is also on the website, so check that out. And we will catch you next time, whenever I get around to it. Bye-bye.